Well, welcome to this week's Sunday Extra podcast for Hope Church. I'm Matt Sturdevant, the lead pastor here at Hope Church, and this week my guest is Pastor Jerry Roberts. Jerry, how long have you been on staff with us?
22 years, going on 23.
Yeah, and you this year you had a big birthday right before all the COVID stuff happened.
Yes, 80 years.
80 years. So Jerry is our most senior staff member, but the rest of us have a hard time keeping up with him. This week, on Sunday, we had our last message of the year called Hindsight is 2020. And we took a look back at some lessons, some things that we either learned or maybe were reminded of this year in 2020, as it's been quite a challenging year. And one of the things that I mentioned on Sunday that I wanted to take a little bit more time to talk about was just this idea of how challenging this year has been. And part of this year, whether we realize it or not, is we've all been experiencing some level of grief. Now, Jerry in a former career, a past life, Jerry's family owned a cemetery and funeral home, and Jerry's gotten to work with a lot of people through grief. Jerry has done all kinds of pastoral advisement and counseling over the years for people. So if there is as close to a grief expert, I would say that Jerry is that guy, or one of those few guys. So I wanted to just take a little bit of time, Jerry, and talk a little bit more about grief. Grief is sort of comes from loss, and often we think about grief with the loss of a loved one, but it can happen with just the loss of something. So let's just talk a little bit about the topic of grief.
Well, grief is a part of life, and we'll all experience grief in some way. I remember the first time that I experienced grief was had a cat that passed away, and it was an older cat, and it began to act kind of unusual, and it was just a little while, and it was gone, and so we buried it in the backyard. But grief comes to us in many avenues besides death. 2020 is a prime example of grief. We had plans. I was trying to plan a vacation back in 2019 about Thanksgiving time, and I just couldn't seem to get anywhere. And I really believe it's the Lord protecting me, so that Madeline and I didn't spend money and then have to cancel plans. In 2020, grief has come about because of what I like to say unrealistic expectations. We had all kinds of expectations. There is a lot of other ways that we've experienced grief. Just isolation, for one. Mm-hmm. And many times we isolate ourselves in the death of a loved one. And so isolation is a very harmful. One of the things that when we pray for people every staff meeting on Tuesday, we have people that are closed in and convalescing and people that are lonely. I mean, and they are lonely. And a lot of it is because of their station in life, but it also is, a lot of it is because of choices they made.
And when you kind of study the topic of grief, one of the things I've noticed is that some people say there's 5 stages, others say there's 7. I saw one that was 12 stages, but there's kind of the 5 core stages of denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. And people will work through those different stages in different ways at different times, and just have kind of different experiences. So could you talk a little bit just maybe about the process of grief? Because it's not necessarily going to be standard that it looks the same for every person. It can be very different, but maybe there's common characteristics. So somebody could be experiencing grief right now because of the loss of whatever that has happened during this last year, and they may not even realize it. But if you just talk about that process a little bit.
Well, grief is one of those hidden processes that many times we bury it very deep inside us and don't expose it, and that's a very harmful. It brews all kinds of issues and problems, and so grief basically needs to be processed. And whether it's 5 stages or 12 stages, I don't know how many stages it is. But I myself experienced phenomenal grief in the death of my wife. And although she'd been sick, and when I use the word sick, I don't mean that she had cancer or something like that. She had a stroke, and she couldn't do. And so for the things that we used to do, we couldn't any longer do because it required all kinds of preparation. And so when Carol passed away, I don't think I experienced grief in the way that most people experience grief, but because I had been grieving for 7 years. And I sensed relief when she passed away, and I wasn't glad that she passed away, but I was no longer burdened with that. But I think the worst part of grief for me was isolation. I could be in a crowd of 100 people. I could be with my family. I could be sitting next to somebody, and I felt isolated. Carol and I were married for 54 plus years, and so we had lots and lots of things that we shared together. So isolation is one of the most devastating parts of grief. And a lot of us have experienced isolation in 2020, surrounded COVID. We've been told stay home, shelter in place, don't go any place. And for some, that's been more, and for others, it's been less. But we've all been isolated in some way during the COVID crisis and the year of 2020.
I know you have sat across the table or in the chair, like we're sitting across from many people over the years who've been experiencing grief. Perhaps those listening or watching right now are experiencing grief. Maybe they are just now realizing, hey, that is some grief I'm feeling. What's some encouragement that you have given people over the years that we could sort of share with those that are listening now?
Well, the process of grief needs to be embraced. You need to go through it, whatever stage it is, last 6 months or 9 months or a year or 18 months. You need to go forward with in that stage and embrace the next stage and embrace the next stage. Don't let yourself get stagnated whatever stage you're in. Jesus said to people, "Come unto me, all you who are labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And so one of the most important things is to turn to God, turn to Jesus, and you'll find rest there at the feet of Jesus.
What about someone who's sort of in that anger stage? I know people are maybe angry right now about the restrictions that are in place or not being able to do the things that they wanted to do. What's a healthy, productive way to deal with the anger phase of grief?
Go forward. one of the things that I've heard more, I think, than anything else is about COVID and the things that are going on about is this mask. I hate this mask. I don't like it. Well, it's for your own good. And if you're angry about it, be angry, but talk about it. And that's one of the things that's good. Although I grow weary of hearing people say, I hate this mask, they're talking about it. And at least they're voicing it and they're not isolating themselves and keeping it inside. Jesus himself felt, I don't know that he felt anger, but when he was on the cross, he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? And so we may feel some of that same emotion that Jesus said on the cross, but voice it. He crawled out. And that's the danger, is holding anger in, because it will cause all kinds of problems. It'll cause not only anger problems, but it will cause you to lash out at people. It may even affect your health. God put all these processes in our life so that we could deal with them. And so we need to push forward in dealing with anger or any other emotion that comes out of grief.
Yeah, I think if you think about, in days in the past, and different cultures, there was actually like a real mourning process of, that was multiple days and even months where people would use that to work through it. Now in our culture today, it's just sort of like, well, maybe you get a half day off for something and then you move on. So and then you add that with the fact that some people are the stuffers. They just stuff everything in, and other people blow up. So it sounds like what you're saying is talk about it, feel the emotions. Don't try to just stuff it.
Yes, people grow weary of hearing this stuff, but and that's one of the things that I've heard over and over and over. Why do they always want to talk about daddy or mother or something like that? Well, that was a great part of their life, and we should allow that to happen. One of the things that really, I don't know exactly how to say it, but when somebody dies, or there's an accident or any kind of trauma that happens, people are quick to rush in. I know when there's a death in a family, people bring food, they bring books, they bring all kinds of things, and they camp out for days on end, trying to comfort the person who is a survivor. And yet, the funeral occurs, and they're there for the funeral. They go to the graveside at the cemetery, and then they say, call me if you need anything. Well, guess what? I'm probably not going to call you if I need anything. Might, but most often people don't call. What I say is, when the funeral's over, the grieving is just begun. And you need to go check on that person. You need to be as consistent. People go on their way, and like you said, we don't have that kind of process. It's like it's the next morning, suck it up and get on, buttercup. And so we really need to embrace somebody that's going through grief, no matter what kind of grief it is. There's one of the I can't remember what you call it right now, but it's one of the things that where men and women get together and it's kind of like a club, and they many times go to the graveside and do a service. And one of the things in that graveside service, they say the cradle and the grave lay side by side, and we never realized that they're that close together. Even if we live to 80 years, that's not very much time in eternity's thought process. So realize that people have needs and go to them. Take something, a snack or something. Take them a pizza. Do anything besides waiting for them to call you. I've got a couple right now that they lost an infant to SIDS, and I did not know this couple prior to receiving a call and asking me to go there. When I got there, everybody was there, the police, the fire truck, the ambulance. Everybody was there, the medical examiner. And they'd been there for several hours. And those people all left, and I was there left with this couple. And I've continued to check back with them. And they've come to church, and they're seeking help for themselves. I've given them a couple of books, given them a new Bible that's in Spanish and English. That way they can have a better grasp of what is going on in the Scripture. And so basically we just need to, as Hebrews 13, 1 and 2 says, keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. So you never know. Embrace people. Now, I know that we can't meet everybody's needs, but we can meet some needs.
Right. You can't necessarily meet the world's needs, but there are people right in front of us that have needs that we might be the one that God has to help engage in that situation. Let me ask you a question. You talked about being there. Sometimes the friends or the family of the person who really is grieving, they don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. So what advice would you give to someone who they have a friend or a family member who is in the middle of grief and really experiencing loss, and they want to love them and help them, but they're like, I don't know what to do. What would you tell that person to do?
Well, there's not any words that are adequate to give solace to an individual who is grieving. The basic thing is just be there. Be present. And I know we want to say something, but God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we use the 1 mouth far more than we use the 2 ears. And so one of the best things you can do as a person that's trying to love somebody that's in grief is to listen. Hear what they have to say. If there's silence, I know silence is a very uncomfortable emotion, but be silent. God says, be silent and know that I'm God. And so if we're always talking, we can't know. So, and that's very important with our relationship to God, is hear what God has to say. Many times God speaks to us through the Scripture, but many times he speaks to us as we just are silent. I remember some of the greatest times I've had with the Lord is where I just laid down on the floor, closed my eyes, and endeavored not to go to sleep. But I spent hours with some music playing in the background and just meditating on what the music is saying, meditating on the words, and hearing what God is speaking to me. And that's many times what we need to do when we have a friend that's experienced a loss, whether it's in the first days or it's in the 100th day, or the third year, or the fifth year, or whatever it is. Listen, hear what they have to say.
It's good. You don't have to have all the answers, but just listening, and I think that really applies. Sort of the main context that we think about grief in is the loss of a loved one, but like we talked about on Sunday, there's been all kinds of losses. There's been losses of vacations. There's been losses of jobs. There's just been losses of, I thought I was going to get to go do this thing that I can't do. And that there may be varying levels of grief. So just sitting and listening to someone as they're talking about this experience that they were hoping to have that they didn't get to have, we actually are doing a lot more than it feels like we're doing when we're present and we're just with someone. Jerry, anything else that just you have a lot of experience with grief, your personal grief that you had to work through, but helping many, many people. Anything else that you'd like to share?
Well, excuse me. We've talked about empathy, but empathy is really identifying with a person. And it's more than just hearing what somebody has to say, but agreeing with them and not arguing with them. Maybe they are totally wrong, but it doesn't do any good in the outset of grief. Now, if they're getting ready to step on a landmine, you don't want them to do that. But you need to empathize with them, the way they're feeling. You need to try to get them to emphasize what they're really feeling. Many of us do a thing in marriage, and it's called stonewalling. And stonewalling is where a guy talks to his wife and says, I'd like to do this, but it doesn't really fill it out. And so she has an idea of what she wants, what he's wanting, and so she goes forward with what he said. But he stonewalled her. He hadn't really said the real thing. And so many times, people in grief stonewall. They don't really say. And so it takes time to get these things out. I remember my wife and I were talking the other day, and she said, I wish I could ask my mother a question. And she said, I wish that every once in a while. But because of death, it's cut us off from those questions. So we need to empathize with people and see if we can get their deepest feelings out. Because we suppress our feelings.
That's really, really good. Jerry, thank you so much for sitting down, talking with me today. I know grief is not everyone's favorite topic, but it's a real part of life. It's a real thing that we often don't do well. And thanks for talking about this difficult topic with us this week.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us for this week's Sunday Extra podcast. 2020 has been an unusual year. It's been an exceptional year. So why not end the exceptional year with an exceptional week when it comes to our Sunday Extra podcast? This is the regular Sunday Extra podcast. We've actually got 3 bonus episodes for you this week as well. We already had one of the bonus episodes yesterday, and we've got 2 more to come. And these are the extended version of the conversation that I had with our guest that we just showed a clip of on Sunday during the message, Hindsight is 2020. I want to invite you to join us next week on Sunday. We're going to start a brand new series called The New You, and we're going to take a look at 5 key areas of life that really do have an impact in our lives, and these are areas that we can sort of reboot and reset as we start the new year of 2021. So whether you join us in person at 1750 Beach Street at 10 a.m. or online at hopechurch.com, hope to see you on Sunday.